thumbs up from Pete Trupus. We get started here a minute early. It's 1 until 4 o'clock here in Dallas, Texas. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Brent Carter. I'm a starting strength coach. I'm on RIP's seminar staff. I've been a starting strength coach since 2013. I've been on the seminar staff since 2014. And today we're going to talk about how to prepare to become a starting strength coach, which the process involves now attending the seminar, opting in, and passing the platform. That's one of our biggest filters before moving on to stage 2, which is now an oral review board. Previously, it was a written exam. Definitely the hardest thing I have done professionally. My essay was, I believe, 27 pages, and that was some dense stuff. Now it's moved to an oral review board, which, as a gym owner, I should mention that as well. I currently live in Texas now, in Dallas, Texas, and I'm the owner-operator of Starting Strength Dallas. And as an employer, it's actually more valuable for me to know that my coaches can articulate this material, this sometimes very dense, heady material, in a way that they can communicate that with other members that are there in the gym with them. And so an oral review board certainly satisfies that, in my opinion, better than a written essay. So before we get to that point, we need to talk about how to prepare for your platform. And just as an overall thing here, this will be fairly brief, fairly short. I want to save time for you guys to have question and answer for me. At this point, I have helped 5 people pass the both platform and go on to become starting strength coaches. I come from an education background in that I was a state licensed vocational instructor at the Focus Personal Training Institute in New York City. I was with Focus since I moved to New York, which was September of 2008, which was a great time to move to the financial capital of the world right when the stock market crashed. And I was with Focus until I left New York to move back to Texas in July or June of 2017. A year later, we opened up Starting Strength Dallas. So I was an instructor there at the Focus Personal Training Institute, so I helped develop curriculum for that school. And then when I moved to Texas, I started helping Nick Delgadillo with the Asgard Company's coaching development program. So I've got a good handle on the academic curriculum side of things and what it takes to become a starting strength coach. Like I said, I help 5 people become starting strength coaches. I help another person also pass the platform, which already in and of itself, that's certainly a challenging thing to do. So there are strategies that I hope you will find useful for you to go through that process. And I'll break it down into the structure and outline that we use in the seminar when it comes to what is a coach. And a coach is somebody who their goal is to get an athlete to move the way you want them to in accordance with a model. And so the coaching comes down to 4 basic components: the understanding, the teaching, the evaluating, and the cueing. So we'll go through each of those 4 components, and we'll talk a little bit about best practices that you can hopefully employ to better prepare yourself to pass the platform, which is a very challenging thing to do. In full disclosure, I did not pass the first time I took the platform, despite the fact that I'd been in the fitness industry for 5 or 6 years at that point. I had a degree in the field, and it wasn't enough. And I didn't pass the first time, nor should I have passed the first time because I was not prepared. I thought I was. I definitely wasn't. My strategy leading up to the first seminar changed significantly leading up to the second seminar. My strategy for getting to the first seminar was coach as much as I can, train myself, go through the novice linear progression, and I got my squat up to 405, I had a body weight at 185, not bad, whatever. But it definitely wasn't enough, and it really opened my eyes into how much more I could be doing to pass the second time around, which happened the second time. So let's go through those 4 components of coaching, which again are the understanding, the teaching, the evaluating, and the cueing. So first, easy part, understanding. Understanding is just knowing forwards and backwards the base material. I'm talking about the anatomy, the physiology, the physics and biomechanics, and the programming models. So, and the programming side of things isn't really going to help you on the platform, but that certainly will be a huge part of maybe not a huge part, but definitely a component of successfully passing the oral review board as well. So anatomy, that's very straightforward. That's just memorization. That is all that is. Memorization is the lowest form of learning. You just memorize it. Do whatever strategies you need in order to memorize it. Write it out. Coloring books. They've got flashcards. These are from Netter's Anatomy flashcards. Very useful. Occasionally I'll flip through it just as a reminder to make sure I'm still on top of my game. But anatomy is just straightforward. It's just memorization of the major muscles that are involved in the lifts, knowing their insertions, knowing their origins, knowing what they look like, where do they stack, how do those things then work together to produce the movement here. So that's anatomy. It's just memorization. Really not that complicated. Physiology. Best thing you can do is to get just an entry college freshman level physiology textbook and read about energy metabolism, read about the muscle contraction, how that stuff works, the sliding filament theory, know the different types of contractions, the eccentric, concentric, isometric, what are the differences between those 3 different types of contractions. And this is all just self-study type of stuff. Same with physics. We're not doing anything that involves electricity or magnets here. It's just basic Newtonian physics. And then once you think you understand these building block concepts and materials, then go and use them by explaining the concept to somebody else. It's one thing to know material. It's another thing to then be able to explain it. It represents a higher level of understanding. So take that information and explain it to somebody else, and that will further enhance your development and your understanding of the material. And it's probably going to expose some weak points that you might have. And so you learn as a process of that teaching. That's why we have everybody at the seminar both coach and be coached themselves. But because by forcing them to coach somebody else, they're going to learn the material even more. Take that concept and apply it to the anatomy, apply it to the physiology, apply it to the physics. And again, we're not talking about super complex physics models here. We're talking about basic Newtonian physics, okay? Momentar models. It's just not that. It's not that serious. It's important, but it's not nearly as complicated as some physics stuff we'll certainly get into. Okay, so that is the understanding. Then the teaching part of this. And what is teaching? Teaching is to facilitate something, to facilitate the learning of something. What that basically means is breaking down something that's complex into small bite-sized chunks. The teaching methodologies are all presented on the website and in the books and in the videos. That's my talk. So that, again, is something that you can do from home, essentially. I mean, to a degree, you certainly can. Memorizing the teaching instructions, knowing them cold. What is step 1, step 2, step 3, so on and so forth. When it comes time for the platform, remember, however, that the teaching methodology is not just a checklist. You say this, you say this, you say that, you say this. It's still a process. So don't, on the platform at the seminar, don't just blitz through that teaching methodology. Make sure that each component of the teaching progression is there, it sticks, and it looks the way that you want it to before you start moving on. Now, that said, do not also belabor minutia within the teaching methodology. What I mean by that specifically is don't spend 5 minutes trying to get somebody's grip correct on squat. Okay, that's just one example. Um, that's one of the first points where we start to notice the green trainers when they start taking way too long on the teaching methodology. So give it its due attention, but do not belabor minor details. Okay, teaching, the evaluation part. This is really where we start to get the filtering out rather the would-be starting strength coach candidates. The evaluation part. The evaluation component is when you take a step back and look at the work that you did during the teaching phase, and it happens fast. It happens in real time. So if all of your experience comes from online coaching, this is going to be a difficult jump from online, where you have the opportunity to pause, rewind, slow things down, to getting real-time evaluation, and then the next step, which would be real-time feedback. So this is really where the rubber meets the road. Some strategies that you can utilize to enhance your evaluation, which is essentially, what I'm saying is your coaching eye. Can you see what is deviant from the coaching model, the movement model, rather? And one thing that we've done at our gym, as well as back when I was in New York working with our students, is I would get under the bar, maybe we're talking about squat here. I would get under the bar and start to mess things up in a very specific way. And my attempt would be to mess one thing up at a time and slowly start to make the error greater and greater, more and more egregious. The goal for the students were to identify the error that I was demonstrating as fast as they could. If it took them 5 reps, okay, all right. If they got it on the first rep or the second rep, then obviously that was a whole lot better. So the evaluation part, seeing these deviations from the movement model in real time, this is something that will be far more difficult for you to do from the comfort of your own home. That said, there is still a means that you can at least get something done. One thing that I did between the first seminar and the second one was I went out to the starting strength forums, and I went to the form check subform, and I would watch the video that the user submitted. I would make my own evaluation and then scroll down and see what the starting strength coach had to say. So that way I was trying to see if my eye and what I was catching lined up with the starting strength coaches and what they were saying. It's going to take a lot of reps. It's going to take a lot of exposure. So if this is something that's of interest to you, then get started on it now and keep on working on it and see lots of reps. Cueing would be the last part of this 5 component model of coaching. And cueing is what we say to the lifter, or what we do to the lifter, to get to them to move closer to the model of movement. And that's based off of our evaluation. So obviously, if you are not seeing the errors that you need to be able to see, then you will not be able to cue them, to fix them. Cueing comes in a few different flavors. There's verbal, visual, and there are tactile cues. Again, this does take time on the platform to develop your cueing repertoire. I think the best thing that you can do to help develop that is to work yourself with a starting strength coach. In between my first and second seminar, I worked with Michael Wolf once a week, and that was extremely beneficial for me in my development as a coach. It exposed me greater to the type of volume and projection that needed to be used with heavy set squats, for example. And it also gave me additional cues that I then used on my very next platform, and they were extremely valuable and extremely useful. best scenario would be to train with a starting strength coach live. If that is not an option for you, then work with a starting strength coach online. That's the next best thing. You will still get valuable cues that you can then use and stash in your mental Rolodex of cues that you will use. Because here's the thing, the same cue will not work every single time. Different lifters process information differently and will need to hear different cues and delivered in different ways. Work with motor morons as much as you can. Motor morons make you a much better coach because they will have the most stubborn of technique deviations that you will have to keep on searching for the right thing to say, the right thing to do to physically manipulate them, to get them to move the way that you want them to. And so you'll be struggling with a particular lifter, but because it's your job to get them to move correctly, you're not going to give up and you're going to keep on trying to find the right thing to do, to say, to get them to move the way you want them to. And as a result of that, you're going to learn a new cue. You're going to figure out a new way of thinking about this lift or this movement pattern in the way that you want. And you're going to store that cue for future use in your little mental Rolodex of cues. Because in general, if you're giving the same cue over and over on the platform, it's not working. And so you need to move on to something else because you're wasting your time. You're just going to end up becoming a background noise, wah, 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 from your lifter because it's just not working. And if you work with a lifter for a long period of time, the same cue might eventually lose its value, lose its meaning to them. And so again, you'll have to find a new strategy, a new way of thinking about the same movement in order to get them to move the way you want them to. So some strategies that you can use. When we would do that activity that I mentioned previously, where I would get onto the bar and I would start to mess something up, and then on every rep I would make it more and more egregious until they identified it. Once they then identified that, I would ask them to fix it. And I wanted them to come up with at least 3 different ways to fix the movement pattern. If you're having an issue with a particular joint, say in the squat, it's knee slide, it might be helpful to, if tighten up your knees or freeze your knees, if that cue doesn't work, think about the joint above or the joint below to get the movement that you want to, okay? Because if the knees slide forward, what are the hips going to do? The hips are also going to go forward. So sit your hips back more. Reach your hips back at the bottom, just as an example. So think about the joint above and below the problem area, and that can give you 2 additional strategies to now address, for example, that knee slide. So now we've got 3 things that we can talk about. We can talk about the knees, we can talk about the hips, we can talk about what's going on with the feet, okay, or the shins. So try to come up with different ways to say the same thing. Maybe it's a tactile cue instead of a verbal cue. Maybe it's a visual cue if that would be appropriate. So that was one of the strategies that we use to better prepare our lifters in getting ready for the platform. So that was fairly short and sweet. Let's see if I have any questions or anything like that. Pete says that his essay was 52 pages. I'm guessing about half of that was trash. So, listen, not everybody can be as concise as me, which, again, that goes to the cueing. I didn't mention this before, but cues need to be concise. So if you're babbling on while the lifter is under the bar and it's not part of an instruction process of the teaching, then you're not doing the cueing right. Okay. I hope this was useful. I hope this was helpful for you guys. If you have any questions, definitely should mention the coaching development course. I did mention it previously, but if becoming a starting strength coach is something that's of interest to you, then definitely go to startingstrength.com and find out about becoming a coach. Apply for an internship. an apprenticeship rather, sign up for the Starting Strength Coach preparation course program thing. And I hope that those drills and learning strategies were useful for you. You can always email me. My email is bcarter@startingstrengthgyms.com. If you have any questions, anything like that, just hit me up. Thanks, guys.